Press play. He's the voice of the intersection of marketing, tech, and popular culture. Thinking is his commodity. DJ, data punk, stylish sock collector, and author of the book Disruptive Marketing. Jeffrey Cologne is your host of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds.
And if it's Friday, it's another episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. I'm your host, Jeffrey Cologne, broadcasting from the Emerald City of Seattle. In this week's episode, we talk about privacy as the new marketing, the debate between Apple and the FBI. We also have a very special portion of Disruptive FM this week. We have our first guest ever on the show. Yes, 3 years this show has been recording. Started in my basement in Maplewood, New Jersey, and is now a top 200 marketing and management podcast since I relocated to Seattle. We have the wonderful author, 5-time published author, Tim Sanders, who we'll be speaking with about his upcoming book, Dealstorming, the secret weapon that can solve your toughest sales challenges. Of course, a lot of people know Tim for writing the book, Love is the Killer App. And he got his start actually working with Mark Cuban at broadcast.com before they sold that off to Yahoo, and then was Yahoo's chief strategy officer for a long period of time. So great interview, our first interview, and we're going to be doing them a lot more often now that we have the nice Skype integration with the Spreaker technology that we use to record this podcast. So we're really excited about that. All that and more, Disruptive FM. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Disruptive FM. And of course, you should be participating in the conversation. This is the 21st century. It is no longer just a read-only society. It is a read, write, remix society. You do have a voice. Use hashtag DisruptiveFM wherever hashtags are supported. The big debate is over Apple and the FBI. And of course, we're not going to get into a ton of the political details of this because I like to keep the show really more centered on the marketing side of the spectrum. But, you know, this is contextually relevant right now and really interesting, I think, in the news. So why is this a big deal? And, you know, why is Apple taking a particular stance in this area? Well, one of the reasons is if we think about the closed ecosystem that an iPhone has, that's what makes it sort of beautiful as well as painful for a lot of people who like to be able to, you know, hack technology, so to speak, from a physical standpoint. But in this particular case, what you have is you have a governing body saying, hey, we can't get into a phone that was used by a suspected terrorist. I'll still say suspected because there's still a lot of information that law enforcement is looking into. But a suspected terrorist, domestic terrorist, and we need your help to actually crack that code to get in to the phone so we can actually look and see what activity was there. Well, basically what the FBI is asking Apple to do is to hack its own users. And for as long as I've worked in not even just tech, you have a trust factor that exists between a company and its users. And the second you break that trust, well, your business model is gone. And so what I think you're having happen, and thinking about this from a marketing perspective, is Apple has always been a very pro-privacy company. If you even look at many of the old interviews, and I encourage you to check these out, with Steve Jobs from way back in the day, and many of them are on YouTube, privacy has always been a core component of Apple. So I think what they are basically doing now is saying, you know, this is a way for us to market ourselves to users because the debate is out there. And Apple, in some respects, I think, is really trying to get some more distance between itself and other tech companies who might not be as sensitive as they are when it comes to private data. But it seems like a lot of companies in the tech community, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, et cetera, are rallying behind Apple in terms of the federal government asking for a lot of this information. And yet, and again, this has a lot of time that has to play out here. But it's interesting in terms of the positioning the company is taking. And of course, we like to talk a lot about this on the show. The sort of the interesting ways that companies position themselves to market themselves. This is happening because the marketing that Apple is putting forth toward the rest of the world is, hey, we are really a pro-privacy company, and if you are going to use our services, we are going to defend your right to those services and make sure that we're not just giving that information away to anybody who happens to ask, even the federal government. So I think it's an interesting debate that's going to happen there. And, of course, would love for everyone to weigh in here on this controversial topic. Is Apple using this really in a sort of interesting manner to help market themselves as a pro-privacy company, or is that something that they should sort of move away from? I don't think they're, sitting around in a room and saying, hey, this is a way for us to market ourselves. I think they're actually being authentic about it and saying, hey, we want to stand for something. And by standing for something, that's marketing now in the 21st century, because we have a world for so long that was just not filled with authenticity. And people want companies and organizations that stand for something, because it always goes back to something I talk about quite a bit. If you don't stand for something, you don't stand for anything. So looking forward to this wonderful new segment that we have on the show. We have a guest here with us this week, and he's a big one. His 5th book is out, coming out February 23rd, and you should check it out. Dealstorming, the secret weapon that can solve your toughest sales challenges. Happy to have Tim Sanders with us today. How you doing, Tim?
My pleasure to be with you, Jeffrey.
Yes, so I think, the great thing I'm really excited about here is you're my first guest on this show, which I've been running for a couple of years, and there's not a better person that I would want to be the first guest on Disruptive FM but you, because I think you have just such a great way of looking at the world and thinking, and you're not a typical salesperson. Do you hear that quite a bit from people?
Yeah, I do. I try to be like not a typical salesperson, like a dentist is not a typical dentist, right? You don't even feel the shot. You know what I mean? No, I'm kidding. I think a lot from a customer-centered point of view, and like you, I'm very design-oriented when I think about things, right? So I think that makes me a little bit different, but at the same time, it kind of blends the lines between marketing and sales.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit, what I really loved about this book, and, I really liked Love is the Killer app as well. But, your background, you sort of going way back, you sold radio ads, and I sort of got my start in radio.
Yeah, we all did, man.
I mean, how did that, give me a little bit more explanation there of like, what was that like back in the day, just sort of hustling, selling airtime?
So famous radio executive Mel Karmazin on CBS said, selling radio was the original B2B. I love that because, so many people in our space kind of got our start there because it had a high enough price point to yield a good commission. And it was creatively challenging, right? Because you had to make the demo spot or get that done. So it was interesting. I started selling radio my sophomore year of high school. This is in the late 1970s. I'm going to date myself. It was 1976. And I was living in Clovis, New Mexico, and I was repping KKQQ FM. And they gave me a nearby college town called Portales as my patch. So you got to imagine, I'm a scrawny little sophomore kid. I put on my white short sleeve shirt and my clip-on tie with my pants pulled up to my belly button and white socks, and I hit the bricks, baby. But here's the thing. So selling radio was a very easy game, right? So you made the dials, or in this case, you knocked on doors. You showed rate cards. You made or convinced someone at the station to make a demo spot. Mm-hmm. You picked up a check. You didn't even get an insert order in those days.
Yeah.
If people walked into the store after the spot run, it's your lucky day. If they didn't, then you had to be creative if you wanted to get them to try it one more time. Mm-hmm. And it was rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It was truly a numbers game. And then what happened during my career is, of course, you go upstream, or at least one would hope you go upstream. So I started to get more into television, cable advertising, and then I went to work for Mark Cuban in '97 and got involved in B2B web services. Like
Wait a minute, hold on. You went to work for Mark Cuban?
Oh, dude, I was one of his first people. I was one of the first employees.
Do you still talk to Mark?
I just sent him a note today because a big story broke in a magazine in Dallas about this IPO, the day we IPO'd, and why his plane says 718 on the tail. But I if I've got a huge $1 billion opportunity for him, we talk. But he's a little busy otherwise. And I say that with love.
It's crazy. I mean, my Shark Tank is probably my favorite show. I watch it religiously. My wife is really into it. I think actually I'd love to actually look at the data there. I bet you. I know for a fact there's a lot of females that love that show because they are entrepreneurial, small business owners, and I think they're always interested in sort of what's the next opportunity. But I got to see Mark recently in Dallas, and I thought he was really interesting. I find the broadcast.com model to be really interesting because I think it was light years ahead of the curve. So tell me a little bit about that, just because again, trying to lay the foundation of how you have been ahead of the curve, which is what makes you so interesting as a speaker and an author now.
Well, early on in cable, I got involved with Discovery Channel because I loved it. They did top-notch network quality shows, but the spots were cheap. And anyway, so I read about Cuban's startup, and my bright idea was I thought, wow, we'll have AudioNet, which is what it was called at the time. We'll have AudioNet stream our overnight programs that don't get any viewership so we could have a better value prop. And then when I kind of got into that community, I thought he was amazing. And I thought the opportunity was amazing. And I realized that everything was going to go over the top. I got it. We would listen to radio on the internet. We would watch video on the internet. I mean, the tech didn't work, but when does it ever work? In the beginning. So I quit. And I went to work for him. And I think I made it was a $14,000 a year comp package plus commissions. But the sale was really hard because Cuban had this philosophy that if the broadcast event failed, we tore the invoice up. And this was 97. So guess what? I tore up some invoices. But I believed in him. He was a voracious reader. He was a quick decider. And he was tough but fair. And I just loved working for him. And, of course, we IPO in 98. Yahoo buys us a year and a half later. Mark moves on to the Mavs. I go out to the West Coast as part of the Yahoo broadcast thing. And then I begin my next leg of the journey, getting involved in critical situations, which, of course, popped up in dozens and hundreds after the dot-com crash.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating. I mean, just to, know that you had that sort of learning experience working for someone like Mark Cuban. I always find working for, people who are influential is what sort of sets your foundations. I was able to work for a Richard Branson startup between 1999 and 2002, and it's changed my life in a lot of ways. I mean, those early days for me, I still carry those no matter what situation I'm in, and I'm sure it's the same with you, because you really just learn how to think, and I think that's the most important thing that we can do. In this environment.
You get that transfer, right? So there was something that I'll never forget. He said back in '99, at the very top of the market, right before it crashed, because that's where it always is. He says everybody's a genius during a bull market.
Yep.
He says, but when this thing comes down to earth, and it will, the strong are going to get stronger and the weak are going to get weaker. And he was so right. And the other thing he said is what you have to understand when things are complicated or things are hard is that 99 times out of 100, it's an equal opportunity nightmare for everybody in the market, right? So whatever sucks for you, sucks for Real Networks, sucks for Windows Media Player Group, everybody's going through the same thing. So the trick then is for us to take adversity and make it our competitive advantage.
Yeah.
And that really got, to tie back into Dealstorming, that's kind of what I realized about sales, is that, okay, if enterprise sales is getting incredibly complex, then our job isn't to hope it goes away or solve it on a case-by-case basis. Our job's to figure out how to make that our brutal competitive advantage. In other words, rapid problem solving is probably the only sustainable competitive advantage in business today.
It's interesting. Let's, talk a little bit more about the book. I mean, I read it. I'm a big fan of it now. I think those who are not in sales should read this book. I've always thought that even if you don't work in sales, even if you do no selling, no matter what you do in life, you should have an understanding of it. So I think this is a really good book to read because you really involve a lot of people who aren't salespeople in sort of this process. But why? My first question to you, I guess, is why is it getting tougher and more complex out there? Why is it harder and harder to sell? As we sit here in the year 2016, why is it more complex, and how should we be approaching, sales moving forward?
And I know you'll appreciate the video gaming analogy. So let's go back to the guy with the clip-on tie selling radio spots in the 70s. 1 to 2 decision makers, a very low technology product on a plastic cart, and very little contracting difficulty, right? And the client knows nothing about the business. You completely own all of the information. You reveal it to them one crumb at a time. That's how we used to sell. And what's changed over the last 30 years is this. 1, there are a lot of decision makers that weigh in on a quality sale. They are empowered by information at their fingertips, which makes them think they have something to weigh in on. Governance rules have made them more involved. And quite frankly, buying has become more of a collaborative process because companies are trying to lower the cost of ownership. So the corporate executive board's been studying this for a while, and they say that most enterprise salespeople have a 5.4 problem, meaning there's 5.4 decision makers involved in the process. And here's where it gets juicy. IDC's been doing research charting the increase in the number of people that weigh in. Either they decide, they sign off, or they influence on a technology buy. Okay? And it's increasing 15% compounded year over year since 2000. Think about it. And what's happening is that for the salesperson, it's not so much that you walk into a room and there's 9 people and you've got to convince them all. You walk into a room, there's 3 people, and they're going to go out and convince the other 6 people asynchronously. Think about the innovation challenge you have now to create a value proposition that is properly illustrated and transferred in such a way so it's stupid easy for them to sell you forward. That's the challenge. That's first, okay? Second challenge is these multiple decision makers are doing self-service, okay? They're a lot consumers are today. You don't go buy a car. You research the car you want to buy. You go on TrueCar, find out how much it should cost, and you make an offer, and you're pissed. If they're not on the same, right? So enterprise buying works the same way. They do all their research. You got all these marketers who are, quote, content marketing it to death. So there's this unbelievable amounts of poorly edited, non-vetted information out there. So either you've been brought in too late to have leverage, or now you got to unteach these people wrong stuff, right? So that's complication number 2. Complication number 3 is the nature of what we sell. So I consult with radio groups. For example, I consult with Cox, and their technology in selling a programmatic buy, dude, it is crazy now. They don't sell spots. They sell programmatic, and they don't even sell just on air. No. It's programmatic on air /digital /local /mobile, and even just inventory lookups makes Salesforce like a walk in the park. It's like installing, the simplest video game. So there's a high complexity to what we sell, and there's a high learning curve for the customer in what we sell. And because everything we sell these days is increasingly appified, meaning it has some technology center that we install, stuff's bumping into each other. So every time you try to sell something, a bunch of technologists have to get involved and make sure you're not breaking something. And this is important because you don't sell products or services at this point, right? You sell change.
That's right.
And to win, the customer has to change not only the way they do business, but something in their stack. Okay, then here's the fourth and the final reason, not to make things depressing, but competition's increasing. And the reason it's increasing is because the cost of going into business against you are dropping because of cloud and crowd. So all of a sudden, you've got more people to compete with selling a more complicated product to more people. And what all of this means, Jeffrey, is that we in the sales profession must do a better job of solving the 100 problems that stand between us and the done deal faster than our competition through innovation and creativity. And that's kind of where we are. Those that figure it out, they outperform their competitors big time.
And you bring up a really good point in the book. My favorite quote. I'm probably going to tweet this a million times, but innovating is not a way of doing things; it's a mode of thinking. That's so key now. How do you get that through to salespeople and a little bit more in an organization that, hey, it's not about the process of how we're going to do this. It's a whole way of thinking and almost rethinking. How do you inspire people here a little bit more to actually, I should say, within sales teams to really adopt this type of philosophy?
I think it starts with what we think of what is innovation, right? So what is innovation? I believe innovation is when a solution finds its way to market. So that's what differentiates it from creativity. Yep. Right? So if it's about the solution finding its way to market, honestly, innovation is a big word for execution. So execution against a problem equal innovation. So think about that. So the mindset for innovation is this. Find all the relevant information to sharpen your perspective.
Yep.
Spend half your time finding the root cause of the problem, not 1% of your time.
Yep.
True innovative thinking starts with what is the root cause. Yep. And this goes back to my background in quality engineering. This is exactly how Deming, my first guy I worked for, this is how these quality gurus really turned around Japan, is they got them to spend half their time just figuring out why is there variance. Before that, everyone was saying, what are we going to do next? Well, it's the problem. Or as Lincoln likes to say, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening my axe, right? So
that's right.
So
to prep.
Innovative mindset says the account executive, they walk into a deal storm, they've got a bunch of people in the room, they say, I think this is the root cause of why we're stuck, but then they're open to suggestion from the outside and transparent. And if you find the right root cause, which is usually not the one you think it is, then you're dramatically more likely to already have a solution in place. And the other issue, too, is that it's not about just finding the right problem. It's about setting the next best play. Because the innovative mindset is different than the creative mindset, right? So the creative mindset is trying to find that eureka moment that breaks through. But the reality in sales is there is no eureka moment that breaks through. That's as antiquated as Bewitched, okay? It just doesn't work that way. You have so many little problems, so many sticking points from the concept of I want to go do a deal with Microsoft till clearing everything, including cloud security protocol, to having a signature on a contract. There is no one idea that gets you around new problems later. So it's really about sequencing the problems and understanding that with every meeting, we're doing one more next best play. And I keep saying that, and I that's a Coach K Duke thing, right? That's a secret to his style. He convinces the players, just don't worry about the score. Don't worry about what you just did. Just worry about the next best play. And I think that is truly the innovative mindset. But the last piece of the innovative mindset, and this is what I've learned the hard way over the last 5 years of consulting, is that innovation is really about improving prototypes. If you can't prototype something, you'll never execute it. A prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. I didn't make that up. That's a Tom Kelly IDEO mantra, but it's true. And anybody on this call that's in marketing or engineering or design, you're probably nodding your head and saying, man, these abstract suggestions make me want to scream. Right? And so climbing the ladder of abstraction by creating prototypes around ideas. Okay, the next best play is we're going to change this process. Well, draw me a diagram on a whiteboard to show me the process. Well, I'm not a very good artist. I don't care. Draw me stick people.
Yeah.
Tom Peters taught me a long time ago, he was one of my early mentors, that the value of a prototype is that an idiot could point at it and say, that's not it. So the last piece of the innovative mindset from the pages of design thinking is to prototype your ideas and whisper them across the firewall to your champion.
Yeah.
And rapidly improve them to make the play work, when you execute it.
And then on the topic of, design thinking, because we're both, big proponents of it, and, I really try to incorporate it into the work that I do, and I know you write about it quite a bit, you speak about it quite a bit. Where is it falling short in some orgs? Are some just, are some companies just not set up based on their organizational behaviors to just not embrace design thinking? Is there a way that it can be adopted at a more rapid rate? And along with that, when we think about design thinking and diversity, I mean, it's important now, I think, to have more diversity because you build better products and services that way. I also think you can sell better because you have different viewpoints that are sitting at the table, as you so eloquently note in the book. I mean, how do you talk to people again about adopting this philosophy who might still be working in for lack of a better term, an antiquated model of business?
Well, let's start with design thinking. So I love Steve Jobs' definition of design. The constant act of problem solving.
Yep.
I love it. I mean, he didn't make that up. That's the one he adopted. By the way, if you ever hung out with him, he was like the Sheldon of Big Bang Theory around etymology. He took more delight in defining hard to define words, and then taking even more delight in you saying, like Johnny Carson, like, well, I did not know that. But anyway, design is the constant act of problem solving. Design thinking is all about segmentation, looking at things from the beginning point to the end point as a journeyist, right? And consistently solving the smallest things to create the shortest path. That's design thinking. But the problem with business is we have metric measurement thinking. It's a complete animal altogether. And it's where we guess a goal because it's all made up, right? Mm-hmm. All made up. So we pluck a goal out of the sky. Maybe the market's making us pick this goal. So we pick the goal. We back into the goal with distributed metrics. We manage people against metrics. We punish those that sandbag. We reward those that overachieve for the right reasons. And as a result, the way we deal with poor design is on an escalation basis, right? So we fix bad design when it interferes with metrics. That is a reactive way to create products and services, but frankly, it's financially driven, whereas design thinking is creatively driven and highly empathetic to the user experience. And I think that's what we have to do, is to help the new generation of leaders understand that empathy is the only way to connect with the next generation from a business standpoint, because it's all connected. And when you metric manage your way to a disaster, whatever the recent crisis is, right? So Chipotle is learning a lot about safety design as opposed to metric management around organic food quality at a reasonable price, which was the old philosophy. We want to tell the story of organic, but we want to still be less than $10 PPA. Well, they paid the price for that. And now they're like, oh, we're design thinking. We're recharting, the journey of the piece of chicken. That they have to do it, but it's a crisis. But how do they come back, right? So what I'm trying to convince leaders now is design thinking will never fail you. When you take a look at companies that adopt design thinking and they segment the customer experience and they incite multidisciplinary collaboration to solve the individual segments, and they consider their job constant problem solving, they just don't have the same oops moments as everybody else does. And as a result, they create a much better customer emotional experience, and their marketing costs are lower. And you can see so many brands, even like early on Google or even like Tesla right now, they don't have to market because they've thought so carefully about designing the experience and trusting the system regarding the metrics that the customers are evangelists.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think, you hear quite a bit in terms of people talking about, experience based on, human activity or behavior is a key proponent now in terms of how you build products or services or how you establish philosophies or whatever it might be that you're trying to persuade people to do. And I think you bring up a good point. Tesla is a good example. If you want a Tesla, it's because they've set up the experience where you're like, look, I want to buy this car. It's a 180 from the example you used earlier in our discussion here, where you go to after doing your research, you go to a dealer and they're just trying to they're just trying to take you to the cleaners. Right? I mean, there's no experience whatsoever. I mean, I think it's why so many people don't want to go through the way of how we've bought cars, and I think we're seeing it almost in every industry. I mean, my most recent mattress that I bought was, I didn't go to a mattress store. I mean, I bought it online, and it cuts all the sort of middle salespeople out of the equation. But the marketing is based on the fact that there's so much word of mouth around the quality of the product and the experience of actually purchasing the product. So, what does that mean for sales? If this is a world where we're going, where, experience is such a big factor, is it going to be one of these worlds in 5 years we're going to have less salespeople, or is it just that sales is going to evolve into a different, way of thinking and behaving, altogether?
I think you're going to have more concentration of salespeople at the top of the funnel. So think about the whole software as services sector right now. It's gone to what they call the SDR model, the sales development rep, right? Yep. So they've got some kid that's pinging people on LinkedIn and getting them to be involved in a demo, and then the SDR gets involved and does the demo and signs them up for $500 down with the intent to scale them up to an ACV of $10,000. And then at some point, there's some qualification that happens where they go, wow, this could be an enterprise client, and then they give them to an account executive, and then normal sales begins to set in. That's a model for the future where there's a lot of work at the top of the funnel. There's a little work at the bottom of the funnel. If you want to become an account executive, it's going to take you a lot of time. It's like being an agent at William Morris now. You're going to have to be somebody's assistant fetching coffee for the first 10 years. And so I see that kind of change coming. But what I think is really interesting is that the recruiting of account executives for companies that sell complex deals, it's beginning to change a little. So I was doing a thing with SHRM, which is the Society of Health, Human Resource Management, and they were talking a little bit about how the interviews are starting to change and the mindsets are starting to change in terms of hiring sales talent, okay? So forever, when you're going to hire an account executive, you did it typically like how you tried to poach a player from an opposing football team. You looked at how many yards they rushed last year, right? Yep. So you hired them based on production, but we all know that that doesn't always transfer. In fact, there is a study that came out last year of brokers on Wall Street that proved that it's less than even chance that a top producer at one brokerage firm is going to even be president's club at the next brokerage firm because the system's more important than the person.
Interesting.
And so what's happening now in hiring world is we're looking for sales candidates that have proven their ability to build teams.
Yes.
Proven their ability to interact with other departments and deliver what one recruiter calls high return on attention. So that when they get stuck somewhere, they can assemble a hodgepodge, or hopefully read my book and assemble a real team that can bring together marketing and finance and operations and legal and sales dev, solve complex problems, and not just fight with each over history. So they're looking for that kind of account executive who's a community builder, who's a web spinner, and not just a person who is an extrovert that makes a lot of calls and grabs them by the tie until they buy.
No, and that's something that we want to leave that in the past, I think, as much as possible, as you and I spoke about. I mean, just, that type of sales doesn't really work anymore. In fact, it makes you almost want to run away, run in the other direction from even doing a deal, because I think so many deals now are really made on that relationship factor, because you like what the other person stands for in some respects, more than, what they know, or even, how good their product is. I think we're starting to see some people take a little more chances, especially in the software as a service industry, where it's like, okay, this isn't maybe the best platform, but I like the team behind it. Let's test it and see what we can do. And you know what? We can actually talk to their developers, and being maybe one of their few customers, they can actually make changes on the fly based on how we use the product. That's I think a big thing that startups are starting to really use to their advantage, compared to if you're a much larger company that has millions or billions of customers and you can't really attend to all those personalized needs.
Yeah. And when you think about it too, if you're selling to a bunch of decision makers from a bunch of different departments, likely several of those people don't like salespeople in general. They're too pushy. They're, too systems focused. They're always trying to get you to contract with them, etc. And that's why I think it's so important to approach complex sales by building teams of people that are mirrors to the people you're trying to sell. Yeah. Because if you can bring in a marketing person to talk marketing to you as a salesperson as part of your strategy, and sitting right next to them is the chief information security officer saying, oh, and by the way, you need to make sure that you comfort them on these issues, or that you let them know you've thought about these complications. And then the finance guy says, oh, and by the way, when it comes to pricing, you might want to break that deal up into 14 regions instead to cut our downside. All of a sudden now, you as a salesperson are beginning to assemble a total strategy that actually deals with everybody on the other side of the room. Yeah. So that you can imagine now you're in a selling situation, so you're talking to their CISO and saying, we've thought of CSAC, and we know you're going to go through this compliance issue because of HIPAA, and here's the things we've already thought of. That guy's on your side. You just talked his language. You talked to the other person they have on procurement and said, we thought about revenue recognition already, and we understand for you what happens when you trigger $1 million sale. So we've cut it into 14 parcels for you, so you don't even have to run it through your group. That guy's like, I love this salesperson. No salesperson's ever going to think of all this stuff on their own, but when they build that Dealstorm team around the problem and get people to join a cause, they can become enlightened about the 360-degree buying experience. And so when they go to market, it's going to resonate.
Yeah. And I mean, the Dealstorming philosophy, I mean, it really is this team-based problem-solving way of doing things. It's, this brain trust or hive mind that, we see so much in some organizations. So, what tip do you give to teams out there that just are non-collaborative, working in silos? And, how do you persuade them to adopt this Dealstorming philosophy so that they can actually start to use it to either turn their sales around or actually get them started, because they maybe by all acting, sort of as individuals, they haven't really been able to make much headway.
So the core philosophy here is don't go down alone, right? So genius becomes a team sport in the new world.
Yes.
And when you bring in people from outside of sales that are either stakeholders in the outcome, think of them as your blockers and tacklers, or experts about your problem. Think of those as your skill positions, your receivers and your runners and your quarterback. You dramatically improve the quality of information in front of you to see the real problem and set the next best play. And the better news about this, Jeffrey, is when you bring in people that aren't in sales world, they don't operate under the same constraints you do. They'll never say that didn't work the last time because they don't know about the last time, right? And believe me, that didn't work the last time is not a good answer. That's what I said around 2003 when they were talking to us about what they called user-generated media, which we now call social media. And all of us in the room were like, what? These guys, Jack Dorsey, iBlogger, this is ridiculous. We bought e-groups in 99. That failed. So that's what happens. So when you bring in people from outside your discipline, the constraints issue goes away. And people are going to spot things that you can't see. People are going to bring in information that you weren't privy to because it's not in Salesforce. But more importantly, and this is the thing I want everybody on the call to listen to, when you involve the delivery team when it's just a sales challenge and not an execution crisis on the back end of the contract, they're going to behave different.
Yeah.
They're going to appreciate having a voice at the table. They're going to help you shape a better proposal that'll manage expectations properly. And later, if things do get ill, which they will, they'll cheerfully come to your defense. Because I call it the difference between ham and eggs. The chicken is involved, but the pig is fully committed. So diversity also brings service execution to the table at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I think the design thinking, I think the hive mind approach, I think a lot of things that, you're talking about, it's so important. As you said, being collaborative is such a team sport now, and really being able to use everyone's brain power in an organization, no matter what the size is, I think is key. Even, as a sole proprietor, the wonderful thing is there's all these people around you, so you can still ask them, what their opinions are in terms of how to do things. But I've written about that too. For small businesses,
you can create standing alliances with your competimates, with your supplier vendors, with your customer champions, or just friends on LinkedIn to create those hives. You don't have to work at a big company to create a deal storm around a problem.
No, not at all. So tell me a little bit about this. I enjoyed your analogy around sort of this, the hacker, the chef, the artist, sort of being the hackers being curious, the chef using the ingredients that are available to them, and the artist, using illustrations and images to show rather than tell. How do you express that to people who are still, trying to sort of use the antiquated models or sort of models that have worked for them for really legacy models that have worked for them for a long time? How do you get them to adopt this sort of new way of, approaching things?
So here's the way I think about it. There's 4 levels to every sales process. Okay. So the first level is to make contact, right? Contact the decision makers, influencers, get information from them to define their pain. The second level you got to fight your way out of is the conceive level, especially if you have a bunch of products and services. So that's where you're going to figure out the proposal itself, the win-win value proposition that makes the perfect recipe, right? Then you got to go to the third level where you convince all of the decision makers, some you'll never meet, that their pain is great enough to drive change. Mm-hmm. Your solution has a low cost of ownership, and you are the only company that can do it. And then finally, when you get through all of that, at the top level of Halo is the contract phase, where you've got to mesh 2 organizations' boilerplates together. Okay, so in each level, you got to put on the right armor for the job, and the armor is a persona. Yep, a persona is a way of thinking. Getting back to innovation is a way of thinking. And there are different ways of thinking for different places you get stuck in the process. So if you're stuck trying to get in the front door, or if you're stuck at the top level trying to mesh 2 contractual things together, I suggest the hacker approach. Mm-hmm. Because the hacker is looking for an unexpected but appropriate path, usually never thought of before by the target, to get around an adversity level. Mm-hmm. So social selling is a great example of people that took the hacker mentality to get through that contact phase. Okay? There's a new thing of the no contract selling model, where basically you go in on more or less a PO handshake, but it's an install of sorts, whether it's SaaS or traditional software. So the rip and replace costs are really high. So you avoid the whole contractual thing. Your teeth are the product. That was a hack. It was brilliant. Mm-hmm. I even see it in the speaking business, where for professional speakers, a hack on the contract side is to skip the required deposit because of companies not wanting to float 50% of a big speaking fee for 9 months. That's right. A hack's way of thinking about things. Right. So that's the right approach. Hack defined as an unorthodox but elegant solution to a problem. Yep. The second persona is the one of the chef. And the chef is not a line cook. Okay, the chef thinks strategically. They think about the eating experience, and to think about that constructively, they get a lot of ingredients on the table. I don't know if you read the book by Stephen Johnson, Where Good Ideas Come From, but that was one of his big ahas, is that good ideas come from having a lot of ingredients on the table. They bump into each other, and that's where the ideas come from. So the chef stocks the cabinet. They're always studying ingredients. They're voracious learners. They are ultimately mashup artists, all right? They know how to combine ingredients and combine elements to create a dish. They even think of plating options. They think of presentation. They obsess about perfection. In the conceive level, when you get stuck trying to figure out what you're going to pitch that's going to work, you got to think like a chef, not a line cook, okay? Then, if you're stuck in the convince level, you got to think like an artist, because convincing people, especially when you know you have that product prospect fit, it's a question of reducing abstraction. Show them, don't tell them.
Yep.
In startup world, they get it, right? The mashup. We are Airbnb for pets. I know immediately what your business is. We're like Uber for tractors. I know exactly what your business is. So you got to think about how you can create illustrations around how your value proposition or how their pain works that are so simple, so vivid, and so transportable, they can turn right around and parrot it to somebody that you'll never meet. And that's where you have to take on the role of the artist, whose goal is to express a feeling and reduce abstraction. And that's what I mean by those three personas. And a great deal storm learns to take one hat off and put a different hat on by knowing where they're stuck in the process.
Love this. And we're talking to Tim Sanders. He is author of the book Dealstorming, the secret weapon that can solve your toughest sales challenges. Also, New York Times bestselling author of Love is the Killer app. And Tim, how do people, stay connected to you in this world? Where do you normally hang out online that they can ask you questions or engage with you?
I'm going to be crazy here, dude. My email address is tim@deepermedia.com.
Oh, you are going post-digital, my friend.
Well,
you are
yeah. Hey, it's all about ease of use. But no, seriously, timsanders.com/DS, as in Dealstorm. That's a place where you can go get a free chapter of the book, get your own copy of the book. If you want to connect with me on social media, I am at Sanders Says. Like Simon Says, but Sanders Says everywhere. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. And as you know, Jeffrey, I'm highly interactive.
Oh, yes. And I think we're going to, I'm loving this. I want to continue some more discussions with you in the future. And of course, thanks for being the first guest on Disruptive FM. So this is a new foray for the podcast, which I'm really excited about because we've never had guests in the past, and the show's been up and running for 3 years. And excited to have you on board here talking to us about the book, and excited to bring you back on a future episode to talk about a number of different things that the world of business and business leaders have to face. So looking forward to speaking to you in the future.
Hey, I feel the same way. You and me, we're twin brothers from another mother.
Tim Sanders, folks, we're excited for his new book that comes out on what date again?
Tuesday, the 23rd of February.
All right. So make sure you pick up a copy at Amazon or where all good books are sold.
You've been listening to an episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Remember to subscribe to the show on iTunes. Purchase a copy of Jeffrey's latest book, Disruptive Marketing, on Kindle, hardcover and audio. Signing off from the city of Seattle. Press pause.